He asked me one question. He said, if you ever had to kill anybody, could you do it? And I thought about it for a minute. I said, yeah, I think I can do it.
In 1986, Fortune magazine wrote an article, the 50 biggest and most powerful mob bosses in the country. They had a chart with the 50 of us on us. I was number 18, the youngest guy on the list, 5 behind Gotti at the time. Today, out of that list of 50, all these years later, 44 of those men are dead. Well, I had quite a pedigree in the mob life in that my dad was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 1960s. And he was also a very notorious figure as far as the press and law enforcement goes. He was always a major target of law enforcement, always under investigation. But more than that, he was kind of a superstar in that life. He was known as an enforcer. He rose through the ranks and became a very popular figure in that life on the street. Originally, my dad didn't want me involved in this life. He wanted me to get an education, go to school, be a doctor. And I was on that road for quite some time. I was actually a pre-med student at Hofstra University when my dad got indicted on some very serious federal charges. Went to trial, was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in 1966. In 67, he lost all his appeals. He kept fighting, and then in 1970, he was shipped off to Leavenworth Penitentiary to do his time. And I was devastated. You know, I figured he was 50 when he went in, had 50 on top of that. He'd never come out of prison alive, and I really loved my dad. I mean, I idolized him as a kid growing up. So at the time, Joe Colombo was the boss of this family, and he kind of took me under his wing. I started to meet a lot of Dad's friends. They influenced me. You know, why are you going to school? Your father threw this death sentence. You got to help him out in some way. So I felt, you know, that I needed to do that. I went to see him in Leavenworth Penitentiary in a visiting room and said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you, you're going to die in here. And that's when, after a long discussion, he decided to propose me into his life. And he sent a message down to Joe Colombo and the powers to be and said, I'd like my son to become a member of the life. And that's how it started for me. Well, I guess I was fortunate in that I was very motivated to be the best possible mob guy I could be. And I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I went on to make a very significant amount of money, and in that life, money is power. I became kind of popular on the street. You know, I had a big crew, and I had a jet plane, a helicopter. I was making a lot of guys around me earn money. And so I was rising through the ranks. You know, in 1980, they made me a capo regime, or captain, and that's a very powerful position. And so, you know, at my height, I was, you know, being groomed to possibly take over the family at one point and be the boss. The turning point for me is pretty remarkable in that I was at the height of my career in that life in 1984. I'd become a major target of law enforcement. I beat a lot of cases. I beat our dear old mayor and U.S. attorney here, Rudy Giuliani, in a big racketeering case in '84. And I was at the height of my career. I happened to be involved in filmmaking at the time. I had a production and distribution company out in Los Angeles, and a film we were producing, it was a kind of a breakdance movie. And I happened to meet a young lady who is now my wife of 29 years. She was a young Christian girl, 20 years old when I met her. And to me, there's no doubt that God put her in my life to not only change my heart, but change my head and lead me out of that life into where I am now. As part of my plan to get out of the life, I had to take a plea to another case that they were indicting me on. I got indicted every year. And my exit strategy was to take a plea, do a couple of years in prison, give back some money, marry Camille, move out to the West Coast. Maybe after 10 or 12 years, the guys in New York will forget about me. I'd live happily ever after in the Golden State. Didn't work out that way. God wasn't going to allow me to backdoor it. It became very public that I was walking away. I was put into a position where I had to make a decision to renounce my life or not. I did, and all heck broke loose, as they say. Contract on my life, my dad disowns me, the federal government's all over me to become a witness and put me in a program because they said, you know, they got word that my life is seriously in danger. And I had a lot of problems, a lot of struggles. I did 5 years in prison, got out on parole for 13 months, and basically really had a hard time getting my life together. Dodging bullets, trying to stay away from people, moving from place to place, trying to avoid the feds putting pressure on me. I had accepted Christ because my mother-in-law and my wife said he would forgive my sins, and I thought that was great. You know, it's like going to confession. But I didn't understand the relationship part with Jesus. Cut to, I violate my parole. After 13 months on parole, I violate. And when they put me back in prison that first night, they told my wife I'd never see her again. They were going to put other cases on me. They leaned all my bank accounts, took all my money, took my money out of my wife's purse because they said it was racketeering money. She basically had no money to buy even milk for the kids, and told her you'd never see him again. And they brought me to the federal lockup in LA and told me the same thing. You're done, we took everything you got, we don't want you to cooperate anymore. And I knew they couldn't put me out on the yard because I had, a contract on me. The Bureau of Prisons were going to keep me in lockdown forever. That was the worst night of my life. It was the only night ever that I ever experienced hopelessness. And I really cried out to God that night and said, if you're really up there, I need help. Give me something to make me feel better. And he did. And that's really where it started for me. In the movie, I think we very vividly describe what happened to me that first night in a jail cell. And what happened was pretty amazing and really life-changing for me because I had never experienced hopelessness before, and I've experienced every emotion in life from ecstasy right down to grief. I've lived a full life, but by far the worst emotion you can feel is hopelessness. I thought everything was lost. I'd never get out of jail again. My life would be confined to that 6x8 cell. I'd lose my wife. How could she wait for me now? I'd never see my kids again. It was just the worst feeling in the world. My heart was just breaking out of my chest. A prison guard walked by my cell. He looked in at me. He said, Franzese, you okay? You don't look good. And I said, get away from me. I don't want to see you guys tonight. Leave me alone. That man left, came back about a minute later and pushes a Bible through the slot on the door. It falls on the floor. Honestly, I saw the Bible and I got angry. I jumped off the cot, I slammed it against the wall because I was angry with God, and I was just a mess. And it took me about a minute. I picked the book back up and I said, you know what? I got nothing but enemies. It's only me and God in this cell. I don't need another enemy. And I really cried out to him at that point. I said, you got to give me something. Make me feel better. Help me. And again, that's when I started reading the Bible. And in my whole life, from the time I was 5 years old, my dad always preached to me that I had to be a man's man. When I got into the life, the same thing. That's the standard in life I had to live up to. And I always looked up to the men I wanted to emulate in my life. So when I came to Jesus that night, it was natural for me to separate his deity from his manhood and focus on what type of man he was, because that was so important to me as a person. And all I can say is when I did that, I was so blown away with the character of Jesus. In every category, everything, that I was so attracted to him as a man that he started to appeal to my intellect and went down into my heart. And that night, for some reason, I really focused on the passion because I was going through my struggle and I wanted to see how he held himself up through his struggle. And we show this vividly in the movie. We actually filmed the entire passion scene again. And we know that's been done before in other movies and done brilliantly. But what we did is we added context to it. We talked about the impact that each step of the way that Jesus was having on me as I was suffering in that cell and struggling. It's almost hard to walk away from there not saying, wow, if Jesus Christ had this kind of impact on Michael Franzese and I'm struggling, maybe he can do the same for me. Today, out of that list of 50, all these years later, 44 of those men are dead. 4 more of them are doing life in prison without parole. And I'm here to give praise and honor and glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If that doesn't tell you something, that when God's got a plan and a purpose for your life, nothing is going to stand in the way, then I don't know what will.